as we went in toward the large trees, or him passed out in the back seat as we drove the car through what is now not existent, but the big tree where you could drive a car through. So he was always there, and we did take the trips, but he also drank on the trips. So the memories are there. Some of them are good, some of them are poor, but they were there. And no matter what, all the way throughout his entire life, he always took care of his family. He always had a good job. He always provided for his family, and always made sure that they came first. He did lose a couple of his jobs, and that was due to his alcoholism. He went through 5 different treatment centers, including one for the military. He had suicide threats, where he ended up in, it used to be like a mental health ward that they had at the old St. James Hospital off Continental. There was one point that that when he'd go into his sober time frame, he'd be sober, but he'd be drinking bottles of NyQuil. So like 2 bottles of NyQuil, within a day. And then that's what he was using instead of the alcohol, although that has alcohol in it. He, at one point when he was working in Helena, he slid off the road. At that point, I was in high school at the time, slid off the road and decided that he was just going to sit in the back seat and was going to drink his 6-pack of beer that he had in there, and he was just going to let the flashers continue to flash and that somebody would stop instead of walking the half mile to the farmhouse. He ended up, highway patrolman ended up stopping, and actually because he had the keys in his pocket, and even though he was in the back seat, took him in. He didn't breathalyze. He refused to do his breathalyzer, so he did lose his license at the time, but didn't have the DUI. Because of that, my mom ended up I had the truck at work, and all my mom had is the car that wouldn't make it over to the Boulder area. So my mom ended up coming to my job to get the truck and going to Boulder to get my dad. And all my dad had to say to her was, "Don't even start." And that's all that he had to say. Throughout my childhood, there was a lot of fights, a lot of slapping. My father never punched my mom, but a lot of slapping to where her glasses went flying, and a lot of pushing. He had a lot of different affairs. I remember at one point we were supposed to go to the drive-in, and instead my mom went and decided to go out to what is now the Copper King, and she saw his government car parked out there, and knew that something was up. So she ended up going and bringing us home and going and parking in the car. My dad ended up coming back with another woman and got out of the woman's car into his government car. My mom had actually known the woman, and that night the woman actually came back to the house where she didn't even know that my father was still married. My father had said that he had gotten a divorce. So there was other affairs like that. My mom remembers my dad down at the D&M, which is now the Derby. And he was out there. She would check to see if he was there. Remembers peering in the window and him walking towards the door, and so she didn't get caught ducking up underneath a car and kind of fearing. So there was those things that went on. I also, throughout my childhood, I grew up at Fran's Bar, which is no longer Fran's Bar, but it was the cool thing to do, to be able to go down there and to play the pinball machines, or to sit up there and to get a Coke or whatever. I even at one point won a tab, and the bartender called me to come down and get my tab, and my dad had put my name on the tab. So there were things like that going through. So he was there, but then he wasn't there for certain circumstances. He did, throughout my adult life, there was other instances. I want to say that he was lucky, but not so lucky. He worked at the state prison. He chose to do the perimeter at times, and he did the perimeter so that he could drink in the vehicle while he was doing the perimeter. There was one time that he had done a double over a 4th of July when I was home on leave, and we were called from the police, from St. James. He had come off the Montana Street exit and had actually got out of the car and was laying flat on the sidewalk when they found him. He also was called, there was another Christmas Eve, my mom was called and asked where he was because he didn't show up for work. My mom and a cousin of mine went back and forth between here and Deer Lodge as many times as they could, trying to find him in the ditch somewhere. Never did find him, and it wasn't until his lieutenant had called and said that they found him out in the parking lot of the prison, passed out in his car. So that's when he was finally asked to go and to basically retire from the prison at that point. My father did have, prior to his death, he did have 8 years of sobriety prior to being diagnosed with a glioblastoma brain tumor, which took his life within 4 months. So he did provide, that 8 years, and it was great memories with me and my children. And my mom said the best 8 years of their marriage, of their 45-year marriage. So that's a little bit about my dad. My sister, which would be my oldest sibling, she was the oldest out of the 4 of us, and my dad's oldest, the one from his first marriage. She was a woman that was of grace, and she was just kind of the epiphany of beautiful. One that, as I was growing up, there was 10 years between us. And as we grew up, it was somebody that you always I'd watch her do her hair and watch her do her makeup, and somebody that you always wanted to look like. Even as she got older, when she was a secretary, kind of just the way that she dressed and her pose and stuff was just, it was just beautiful. But hers was in her 20s. She did crack cocaine. She was in an abusive marriage that ended up her in a home for abusive women. She had broken jaw, where she had taken a bottle to her face. My dad went and left Montana and went to Georgia and picked her up and her 2 boys. When she got up here, she didn't do much of the cocaine. She had kind of put that aside, but was doing the alcohol. And her alcohol use was to the point that it was from the time she woke up till the time she went to bed. At my young age, just being into college at the time, I saw her drinking as being cool, because I could go out with my sister and go and have drinks with my sister. But hers was where she would get up and she would basically do the double shots with just a splash of soda. Then it was, when you'd show up and she'd be drinking at 10 o'clock in the morning, you'd ask her what she was drinking, she'd say iced tea. But it wasn't the iced tea, because she wouldn't let anybody get near her glass. It was the Seagram 7 that was on the rocks from the time she woke up till she went to bed. In 1999, at the age of 37, her body started deteriorating. She started having problems with her liver. It began to shut down. She was on life support system, and she needed a liver. At that time, she was given a blood transfusion to help her kind of survive and to get through and come off life support. She was told at that time that she would need to go ahead and go through rehab and treatment and be tested for her liver on a regular basis in Seattle. She went through the rehab. She was sober for over a year. Her liver ended up rejuvenating itself, which is, the liver is the only organ in the body that can do that. You can also cut pieces of it off, and it'll regrow itself if it's healthy. But after being given the clean bill of health, she was also told that she could never touch another drug. She could never touch another drop of alcohol, because if she did and she would have problems, she could never be put on a donor list. Within 3 months, she was back to drinking. And that was thanks to her husband that enabled her, who he himself wanted to go and play in the band and wanted to go and have his affairs. So the easy way was to put a bottle on the coffee table when he walked out the door for the night. That was in 2001. In 2005, when I saw my sister at the end of June, she looked like an old lady. She was 43 years old. She could hardly walk. Her legs looked like rods. Her arms had the skin hanging off like a 80 to 90-year-old woman. And like I said, it was like when she walked, she would have to take each step as she walked. Within a week, she was on life support system and never came off that life support system. Her organs had began to shut down, and she just slowly deteriorated, and we pulled her off the life support. So that was my older sister. My older brother, that was also from my dad's first marriage. He did marijuana in high school. My dad was called frequently and told that he needed to come up to the high school parking lot, that my brother was out in his car smoking his weed, and to come and get him. My brother then also moved back to Georgia, where we're originally from, and he himself did some of the cocaine and turned himself into drinking. Within 7 days, at one point in his late 20s, he totaled 2 cars and got 2 DUIs. So my dad went down there and got him and brought him back up here. He continued to drink and do his thing, but none of the hardcore drugs. It was more the alcohol was his drug of choice at that time. In 1990, he met a woman. 91, he had a child. And at that time, he quit everything cold turkey, tobacco and everything. He stayed sober for 21 years until his daughter's 21st birthday, and they decided that they could have some wine. So him and his wife started drinking wine with that birthday. The one glass of wine at the birthday turned into maybe a glass here and there, that turned into a bottle here and there, that turned into a bottle every night. Within a year, they were back to drinking a bottle every night, and they decided that it was time, that it was a problem for them, and they quit after that year again. And they have now been sober for 8 years. That's my older brother. My little brother, that was my only full-blooded brother, had a lot of mental health issues. He did drink, but not as much as the others. It was more of the mental health and curbing his mental health, self-medicating. His dream was always to be a cop, so he kind of watched what he did with his drugs and his alcohol and stuff like that. So it never really became a problem for him. But he passed away from suicide in 2005. So to kind of give you some realism, my brother died July 1st of 2005 from suicide. My mom and dad are the ones that found him. My mom found him. My dad is the one that took him down from where he hung himself. 2 weeks later, well, at that time, my sister was on a life support. 2 weeks later, we pulled the plug on my sister. So my dad went through losing 2 children in 2 weeks. And that my dad hit rock bottom within a year. So after that, it was kind of binge drinking here and there. But that year was awful for the entire family, especially with my dad's drinking. We feared the worst of it. My dad would end up doing something as well. My family has a lot of mental health issues and things that have gone on. My brother's suicide. My sister had bipolar issues. And me and myself and my parents have a lot of depression and anxiety issues. I'm not saying that I'm perfect and that I've never touched alcohol or never touched drugs. I've just never had an addiction towards them, and I take that for the life that I have led. I always been told when I was growing up that it was 2 of 1 ways. That if you grew up in an alcoholic or an addictive family, that you had a 50% chance of either becoming an addict or marrying an addict. So that was the chances that I had going into it. I drank starting in the 8th grade. We would steal little bits of liquor out of the closets. We even had one time that it rolled into the sewer drain. So I guess that told us that we didn't need that night. Then it moved to college. Didn't drink much left in high school. There was a lot of drinking in high school. I drank 2 to 3 days a week in college. I lost my 4-year scholarship for nursing because I was drinking too much and wasn't studying enough. I did recover from that and ended up going on to graduate from college in a different degree, but I had to pay for it myself. I also would make it to the point that I seem to take care of others, I think, and use that caring for others, that is that codependency that I grew up with and saw my mom doing. There would be other girls that would be at the bar that would be so drunk or would be in the blackout stage or would be undressing at the bar, and I would take them home or make sure that they were okay so that they didn't get hurt in the other end. So I saw that codependency back in college already. I did try marijuana several times, but that one I kind of feared because of my military career and going into the military. There was one point that I did from across the street at my mom's house. came home to my mom. I was in college at the time. My mom went looking for my dad, and that night she told me, it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and she sat there and she said, "Stephanie, I don't know what the heck you drank, but you sure do stink." And it was the marijuana smell. It had nothing to do with what I had drank, but it was the marijuana smell. So I just kept my mouth shut and zipped and left it at that. I said, well, I don't know what was in those drinks, and kind of left it at that. So up until probably the age of 25, I did my fair share of drinking. And then at that time, I knew that I had to make a life change because that wasn't working for me, and because of what I had been told throughout my life. Looking back on it now, my first love throughout high school was an alcoholic. He has since then recovered and no longer drinks, and is married, happily married, 5 kids. But that was the love of my life in college. That didn't work out because of where it was, where we were at the time. The man that I ended up marrying, I didn't think was an alcoholic, but as time progressed after I married him, he ended up being an alcoholic. When he came back from overseas, from his deployment, he started with half a pain pill. They don't lead to 1 pill a day. That led to 2 pills a day. That led to 3 pills a day. I thought he had curbed that. He's my ex-husband for 16 years now. I thought he was over that. Talking with my kids the last 6 months, he still is addicted to prescription medication. I dated a guy that for a long term that ended up being controlling, which is then a part of my codependency and being accepted. The next guy that I dated had the alcohol problem. The next guy I dated, which was recently, the last year and a half, was a recovered addict for 2 years, and was recovered in that he wasn't using, but wasn't recovered in his character defects. He still had the same mechanisms as he did when he was an addict, and he didn't understand that. And he didn't understand why he needed a program or why he needed to work a program. And I gave it 200%, and I tried over and over, but you can't really help those that don't really want to be helped or don't want to work a program. And it takes a lot of work. And that work is not only, I'm not done either. I take my own work. Like I said, my codependency. I have the codependency issues, and I know that I have those codependency issues, and those are things that I have to work on. And anybody that is a loved one of an addict knows that they should be working a program as well, just like the addict, or things aren't going to be able to change. I also have a daughter. She's 21 years old. She started drinking at the age of 17, unbeknownst to me. Her drinking turned, after graduation, turned into a lot. She became very promiscuous. Hers is kind of the same thing, coming from a divorced family. Her dad being the way he is, my codependency, she has that mixture as well. She has the need to be needed. And you can see it with the mates that she has chosen. And I am so blessed, not saying she's an alcoholic. And she now, instead of drinking daily, she binge drinks. She drinks when I take care of my grandson. My grandson has kind of curbed her from doing it on a daily basis, but hasn't curbed her enough to not do it. So I give it to my grandson to kind of slow the process down for now, and hopefully she realizes sooner than later. She's 22, so I just hope it doesn't take too long. I'm also, as you all know, I was in the military. So coming back from overseas, a lot of my soldiers used alcohol and prescription medications. I was a lieutenant colonel, so I was up in rank, and so it was taking care of those. Because at that time, you had to worry about, you couldn't go get help, because if you got help, you were ruining your career. So it was taking care of those soldiers and taking care of those soldiers' families, and making sure that things were okay and setting them in the right direction and hooking them up with the right programs to take care of them. And that's kind of where I realized when I came back from overseas what I wanted to do. I started in the mental health field because I figured I had been a soldier. I had also been a spouse of a soldier, and I'm the parent of kids that have parents that have deployed. So why if we go to somebody else, they've never been there, done that, and I've been there, done that for all of it. Things didn't work out with the mental health field because of my military career. I wasn't able to finish my degree with an internship. So I did things in diverse studies to learn about different cultures, different areas of the world, different people, different things that they believe in, and I learned about that. I also took a graduate certificate program waiting for an internship in mental health in addiction studies. I completed that. Then I decided that there was nowhere else for me to go, so I quit school. So then 3 years later, when I was getting ready to retire, I checked back in to see what I could do to get that mental health degree, and they told me I would have to take all my courses over again because it had been way too long. So then, because I had already taken in addiction studies, some of those courses, addiction studies now had become a master's degree. I only needed 2 more courses and 600 hours of internship. So I completed the 2 classes and took the 600 hours of internship this last summer through December, and I graduated with my master's in December. So I have a master's in addiction studies. I've applied for my LAC. In order to get an LAC, I have to have 1,000 hours of supervised time, which takes an awful long time. It can take up to 6 months, but I work part-time. And I tell everybody, I work part-time because addiction isn't something I have to do. Addiction is a passion of mine and something that I want to do and I want to work in. I collect a military pension, I collect a VA disability, I pay my bills through that. The addiction portion of it is because I want to be there and I want to help people and have them see the light to work a program. I do currently work for Department of Corrections and CCCS out at their CCP program and watch programs out in Warm Springs.